At the close of the 1960s, many of the strongest influencers in the period's idealism felt like you do the morning after a real wild party. All hungover, a taste in your mouth that's a lot like an overfilled ashtray, and too much like you'd been rolled over by a tank. You can hear it in the things people were saying at the time. Things like, the 60s ended at Kent State. That was Tom Wolfe. The American dream became the nightmare. That was Hunter S. Thompson. The 60s had the audacity to hope, and that was its greatness, but it didn't deliver. Marlon Brando said that. I woke up this morning, found my head was full of stars. I said it's over, but my heart, it wouldn't break. That was Leonard Cohen. And one of the four lads who'd kicked off the youth revolution to begin with, John Lennon, said, "All I want is the truth."
I'm sick and tired of hearing things from uptight, short-sighted, narrow-minded hypocritics. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. I've had enough of reading things by neurotic, psychotic, pig-headed politicians. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. No.
When the dreams and promises that you've placed your hopes in end up being a mirage, it's only human to feel angry. In the mid-1970s, a lot of teens and young adults found themselves in this camp. The nation's shift toward a decidedly more cynical era could be heard in anti-war statements such as, "War is not healthy for children," or other living things. On the equal rights agenda, the demand for black civil rights encouraged a louder beating of the drum as seen in the rise of feminism. At the same time, both movements continued receiving backlash from the country's conservatives, especially the silent majority campaign responding to the liberal excesses of the counterculture. Meanwhile, Hunter S. Thompson's satire Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas perfectly captured the disillusionment and cynicism of the 1970s.
We had 2 bags of grass, 75 pellets of mescaline, 5 sheets of high-powered blotter acid, a salt shaker half full of cocaine, a whole galaxy of multicolored uppers, downers, screamers, laughers, also a quarter tequila, quarter rum, case of beer, pint of raw ether, 2 dozen amyls. Not that we needed all that for the trip. But once you get locked into a serious drug collection, the tendency is to push it as far as you can.
Hot damn, I never rode a convertible before!
While on screen, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson was a classic film about mental health and institutional oppression. It resonated with the pervasive anti-establishment sentiment that filled the times. But I gotta tell you, I'm not sure which situation was worse. The one where Nurse Ratched was sicker than any of the inmates, or the one where Southern California's streets are chock full of really sick people who need a hospital. Regardless, they've all been shuttered for years here in California. Socially, the country was torn over the war in Vietnam. After nearly 10 years of demanding an end to it, sick of seeing their friends come home with fewer limbs than they left with, or worse, in coffins draped under red, white, and blue doilies, Americans had to watch the last of their countrymen being picked up from Saigon rooftops and helicoptered to safety.
Tuesday, April 29th. The streets of Saigon, usually jammed with traffic at the morning rush hour, are quiet. The attack by communist aircraft at Saigon's Tan Son Nhut Airport the day before has prompted a 24-hour curfew. And the only people on the streets are ambulance drivers and policemen. With communist forces only a few miles from the center of Saigon, the order to evacuate American nationals is given. Americans and citizens of third countries who have been guaranteed space on the airlift gather at assembly points for the bus ride to Tan Son Nhut Airport. But the buses have to be abandoned when helicopters at Tan Son Nhut come under fire from both Communist and South Vietnamese troops.
The resurgence of the far right could be heard in the flood of media who rose to support those views. On PBS, William F. Buckley Jr.'s show Firing Line provided a platform for conservative intellectual arguments and debates, challenging the comment that liberal voices dominated mainstream media. And the nation's Bible thumpers were represented by televangelists like Pat Robertson, whose show continued to grow in popularity during the 1970s. Robertson mixed religious teachings with conservative political commentary to activate a religious army of evangelicals. To get the true measure of things, realize that this segment would likely be referred to as MAGA these days, or like I like to call them, maggots. Pat's audience was the seed of MAGA. Personally, I think the church should stay, literally, the hell out of politics. We don't need to turn America into a Christian theocracy. You couldn't tune it out anywhere. Even radio had lost ground to the conservative voice because this was the era that birthed Rush Limbaugh. I say that, even though his show didn't officially start until 1988. Rush's first success, though, came in the 1970s, and it laid the groundwork for everything that unfortunately came after. American conservatives received a full-on indoctrination in conservative thinking from Rush and his blend of incendiary intolerance and populist appeal. Running through everything, there was a feeling that the social changes that the 60s had promised were as far away as ever. It wasn't long after TV cameras beamed those images from Saigon rooftops until Nixon's presidency came crashing down with the shameful Watergate scandal, and Mr. I am not a crook was proven to be exactly what he said he wasn't. President Ford only added to the country's misery when he pardoned Nixon.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
Showing the country that there were actually two different sets of laws in place, one for them and one for the rest of us. And it seems we're re-listening to that dialogue today. We might be getting a second look at it, as Mr. 91 Indictments and counting waits for his day in court, something that's coming later this month. For Christmas, I'd like someone to give him a brand new orange wardrobe and a room with a view of a prison yard. Economically speaking, record inflation and unemployment, especially in the working class, widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots. The energy crisis stranded Americans in long gas lines, paying unheard-of prices for gas. Thorny civil rights issues were still forcing us to grapple over diversity issues like school desegregation, affirmative action, and voting rights. Toxic waste in New Jersey's Love Canal, oil spills in Santa Barbara, the highly publicized burning of Ohio's Cuyahoga River, and other events all raised public alarm. Closer to home, the divorce rate was skyrocketing. During the 70s, American couples split up at more than twice the rate that they had in the 60s. Even in families where mom and dad stayed together, the personal needs of each parent became more important, with parents spending more time to claim more of what they individually thought was important. In the meantime, family harmony took it in the shorts. America's kids were caught in the crosshairs. America was experiencing an epidemic of frustration, anxiety, and anger. I think this classic clip from the movie Network, performed by the late actor Peter Finch, perfectly captured the spirit of the age.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
If things behind the front doors of American homes were not real pretty, they sure didn't look any better once you stepped off the front porch either. Thinking about this, it can't be a surprise that punk rose out of big cities where bad times followed. White flight. After the folks that could afford it ran like hell to the suburbs. After that, the only thing left behind in the cities was crime and desperation. Some of the biggest movies of the 70s were studies of urban decay and a growing sense that America's kinder, more innocent days were lost forever. A nasty, gritty world was played out on the big screen in period films like Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro, where violence captured the alienation and anger of 1970s city life. And The Godfather. It reflected the changing moral landscape of America in the 20th century.
Don Bassini, I want to thank you for helping me organize this meeting here today. And also the other heads of the 5 families, New York, New Jersey. Carmine Cuneo from the Bronx and Brooklyn, Philip Tattaglia. From Staten Island, we have with us Victor Strachey and all the other associates that came as far as from California, Kansas City, and all the other territories of the country. Thank you. How did things ever get so far? I don't know. It was so unfortunate, so unnecessary. Talia lost a son. I lost a son. We're quits. And if Talia agrees, then I'm willing to let things go on the way they were before.
We are all grateful to Don Corleone for calling this meeting. We all know him as a man of his word. A modest man. He'll always listen to reason.
Yes, Don Barzini. He's too modest. He had all the judges and politicians in his pocket. He refused to share them.
When did I ever refuse an accommodation? All of you know me here. When did I ever refuse? Except one time. And why? Because I believe this drug business is going to destroy us in the years to come. I mean, it's not like gambling or liquor or even women, which is something that most people want nowadays, and it's forbidden to them by the bits and the bounty of the church. Even the police departments that have helped us in the past with gambling and other things are going to refuse to help us when it comes to narcotics. And I believed that then, and I believe that now.
Times have changed. It's not like the old days where we can do anything we want. A refusal is not the act of a friend. If Don Corleone had all the judges and the politicians in New York, then he must share them. All he loved is use them. He must let us draw the water from the well. Certainly he can present a bill for such services. After all, we are not communists.
I also don't believe in drugs. For years, I paid my people extra so they wouldn't do that kind of business. Somebody comes to them and says, I have powders. If you put up $3,000, $4,000 investment, we can make $50,000 distributing. So they can't resist. I want to control it as a business, to keep it respectable. I don't want it near schools. I don't want it sold to children. That's an infamia. In my city, we would keep the traffic in the dark, people, the colored. They're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls.
I hope that we could come here and reason together. And as a reasonable man, I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to find a peaceful solution to these problems.
Then we are agreed. The traffic in drugs will be permitted, but controlled. And Don Corleone will give her protection in the East, and there will be the peace.
But I must have strict assurance from Corleone. As time goes by and his position becomes stronger, will he attempt any individual vendetta?
Look, we are all reasonable men here. We don't have to give assurances as if we were lawyers.
You talk about vengeance. Is vengeance going to bring your son back to you? Or my boy to me? I forgo the vengeance of my son. But I have selfish reasons. My youngest son was forced to leave this country because of this Salazzo business. All right, I have to make arrangements to bring him back here safely, clear of all these false charges. But I'm a superstitious man. And if some unlucky accident should befall him, if he should get shot in the head by a police officer, or if he should hang himself in his jail cell, or if he's struck by a bolt of lightning, then I'm going to blame some of the people in this room. And that I do not forgive. But that aside, let me say that I swear on the souls of my grandchildren that I will not be the one to break the peace we've made here today.
So as much as punk reflected a new reality in the nation, musically, it continued America's musical evolution and another unpredictable fork in the road. There was a clear line of descent. You can hear a connection between punk's insistent vocals and the strength of Bessie Smith, or the blitzkrieg guitar thrash of Billy Zoom or Steve Jones, and blues great Howlin' Wolf. With nothing to do, and a sense that the walls were closing in, teens living in places like New York, Detroit, and Los Angeles swam in an ocean of boredom and alienation that needed venting. Punk's rawness and DIY attitude made it easy for anyone who had the need to hit back, or at least spit into the audience, to become an anti-hero. Punk's rebelliousness had a common spirit with early rock and roll and artists like Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley. You can see it splayed out right in the open if you compare the album covers from The Clash's album London Calling and Elvis Presley's first record. And while Elvis remained a country boy at heart, Punk's dedication to defying social norms to be your authentic self had early role models like Little Richard. Punk rock intentionally took a sharp right turn off the trend line music had been steadily moving in since at least the late 1940s. And thank God, too, because rock had lost its urgency and rebellion that had inspired the 60s to be what they had been. Without that inspiration, there never would have been a Bob Dylan, or a Mick Jagger, nor a James Brown, or a Pete Townsend. Neither would you have had Janis Joplin, Tina Turner, or Grace Slick for that matter. But by the 70s, the electricity that had supercharged the 60s had dissipated. Instead, teens were served up the likes of the Osmonds and the Captain and Tennille. Even in its crunchier moments, 70s rock acquired the term corporate rock. Bands like Journey and Foreigner and Boston were more like money-making brands or even record label ATM machines playing music for the musically challenged. Instead of offering the latest generation of record buyers the authentically passionate real deal that guys like Dylan or the Beatles had once given them. For every authentic rocker like Springsteen, there was a poser like Barry Manilow. We used to call him barely man enough. Or Dan Fogelberg, which is fine if you're drooling into the sink in the dentist's chair, but lousy if you need something that matches the messed up way you're feeling inside. And even the more provocative music from the likes of Kiss or Alice Cooper was literally just play acting. But to be honest, for those who had been paying any attention, the seeds of the cynicism and frustration that was in full bloom when punk finally exploded were already in their germ states in the 60s. For instance, I'm thinking about the Beatles' White Album and Lennon's song, Happiness is a Warm Gun. And although the Beatles could never have been a punk band, other late 60s and early 70s bands did at least point in punk's direction. A couple examples will help here. Before punk came proto-punk. Of course, as Chrissie Hynde puts it, these things never developed that way. First up, the Sonics. They were a band from Tacoma, Washington, and were one of the pioneers of garage rock. So this is their song, The Witch. It's a true garage rock classic.
Oh, she'll put you down, 'cause she's an evil chick. Say she's the witch. She got a long black hair and a big black car. I know what you're thinking, but you won't get far. She's gonna make you ill, 'cause she's the witch. Right now it's time to take out the jams, motherfucker! Jam! I'm gonna
And then there was the MC5, MC for Motor City. They were a band from, obviously, Detroit. They came literally kicking and screaming from Detroit's proto-punk scene. They added political activism to the Sonics garage band Fury. Let's check out their song, Kick Out the Jams.
Yes, I'm starting to sweat, you know my shirt's all wet, what I'm feeling. It's the sound that bounces, resounds and rebounds off the ceiling. You gotta have it, baby, you can't do it without it. When you get the feeling, you gotta song them all, put that mic in my hand, and let me kick out the jam. Yes, kick out the jam. Kick out.
It's a powerful manifesto for social change. Like the punks that followed, MC5 used raw language and imagery to make their points. Sonically, their aggressive, unrefined sound also made a statement. They were intentionally loud, rough, and angsty. The Stooges. The band's frontman, Iggy Pop, might be the original punker, and his band, The Stooges, paved the way for punk rock with their aggressive sound and confrontational stage presence. I mean, in their time, the late 1960s and early 70s, people were not quite ready for what the Stooges regularly served up. Diving into the audience, inciting mosh pits, slashing himself with broken glass, you could say Iggy was able to hold an audience's attention pretty well. And then combine the visual with songs like this one, I Want to Be Your Dog, which is about rebellion, sex, and frustration. The Stooges made a lot of people squirm, which was exactly the thing that they were going for. So here's Iggy from an interview.
Thank you very much for being here.
Hey, thank you.
I was reading your book last night, and it's a very interesting piece of work you put together. You were born and reared, and you lived in a trailer, right?
Yeah.
And now, having grown up in a trailer, does it have any thoughts that affects a person one way or the other, as opposed to living in a stationary house?
Yeah, absolutely. Because everybody. Well, first of all, there's like trailer trash. You ever heard the term?
No.
Well, it's a kind of a fly-by-night connotation, and plus things like if your dad walks in the front door, right, and he closes the door, like the house shakes a little bit, you know. So it's kind of like God is home, or something, No,
did they ever
listen, Dad? Wait a minute. No, it's I don't know. I'm glad I did,
Yeah.
At least it made me different.
Yeah. But at the time, was it affecting you adversely with your peers, or it was no big deal?
Well, not with my peers, just with the PRI, etc. that I went to school with,
Now tell me about also.
I kind of liked it because it was like ahead of its time,
Yeah.
My father's a visionary.
Did they still live in a house trailer?
No, they just sold it just a few months ago, and they've moved down to somewhere in the Carolinas.
Yeah. Now tell me about hurting yourself on stage and cutting yourself, and then tossing yourself into the audience. Is that still?
Well, okay. Tom Snyder asked me about that. No, it didn't. It never did hurt. It's a funny thing about you get a good band, and you get them cooking, and if the beat's right and it's a good riff, nothing hurts. somehow.
So
it's sort of you're getting a bit of a state. You know, I suppose it has to do with your adrenaline
maybe.
glands, but afterwards, that's the trouble. You know. Sometimes, you know, it would be just the sort of thing like I had to get a new tooth for your show this morning. It was a real pain, you know, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to, you know. So, but that was just a sheer accident where I was getting so into it that I just smushed the mic in my tooth by mistake. But then other times, you know, I'd sort of just fling myself at the audience because of their indifference.
Tell me. Oh, okay. Now, in the book, you described the first time you really started to cut yourself with drumsticks. You were drumming then, right?
Yeah.
And you were kind of.
I was singing by that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, tell me about the time that the first time you made the decision to jump into the audience.
To cross the proscenium, as it were.
Yes.
Okay, there were three stages to that. The very first time I did it, it was the second gig I'd ever played in my life, and I opened up for Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, and I knew he was going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. And it was about 15 minutes into my set, and it was going nowhere. And so I thought, what am I going to do? Listen, you know, there's like 15,000 bands here in the Detroit area. There's one place to play, you know. I got to stand out, right? So, just like a little kid, like, you know, it's a bit hebephrenic of me. Like, I just sort of went, like, have you ever seen when little kids don't get attention and they just go like that and pretend they're going to fall on the floor? Well, I really did, you know. And, you know, and that created a stir.
Now, what did you land on? Did you just go right on over?
Well, it was funny. I'd planned to land on. I sort of spotted a pair of very plump young ladies, and it was my intention that they would be best suited to cushion the fall. Yeah. But I didn't, you know, I didn't reckon. I figured they'd be lucky, you know, to have, like, you know,
part of the show, sure.
Well, you know, too. I mean, they weren't like, you know, they weren't ravingly attractive or anything. So I figured, you know, maybe they'd like some company, but instead they just.
Probably one of the earliest recognizable punk influences was Lou Reed and his band, the Velvet Underground.
Child in the dark comes in bells. Your servant, don't forsake him. Strike, dear mistress, and cure his heart.
Founded by Reed, who was vocals, guitar, and keyboards, and John Cale on bass, keyboards, and viola, of all things, in New York City in 1965. By the end of the year, they added Sterling Morrison on guitar and Maureen Tucker on drums. Their song, Heroin, was written from the point of view of an addict. We're listening to Venus and Furs, a song about sadomasochism. Everything about this band was intended to provoke a response. As well as being forerunners of punk, the Velvet Underground also pioneered a path into the avant-garde that later punks followed. It obviously opened doors for their collaboration with Andy Warhol, and each of the four had their own place in New York's art scene. Reed, the band's poet, had studied literature at Syracuse and had been influenced by poet Delmore Schwartz. You can see that influence in Lou's fascination with urban alienation and existentialism. John Cale had trained as a classic musician, but was also immersed in the minimalist and avant-garde music scene. Cale also played in Lamont Young's Theater of Eternal Music, known for its pioneering drone and extended duration compositions. And then guitarist and sometimes bass player, whenever Cale was on viola. Sterling Morrison was into the visual arts, especially experimental film. He had also gone to Syracuse with Lou. Mo Tucker, the VU's drummer, also had a classical music background like Hale. His avant-garde approach to percussion showed the strong influence of John Cage and other minimalist composers. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about minimalism, check out my episode 15 from season 1, A Celestial Pulse of Minimalism. There's a link in today's show notes for that.
Severin, speak so slightly. Right like going into the mind. I'm so you're gonna make me go blind. Oh, why he did tickle me down to my toes. Ooh, helpless, why not have it in his nose? Why like going is of my brain. Oh, why light is gone, drive me insane.
The famous pop artist Andy Warhol, you've probably seen his paintings Campbell's Soup Cans or Maryland Diptych, was the underground's major patron, and he probably had the greatest influence on their development. The VU did a number of mixed media shows called The Exploding Plastic Inevitable that combined the band, a pseudo-singer German fashion model named Miko, some of Andy's films, dancing, an elaborate light show, and even the audience themselves via live interviewing during their performances. Everything about the shows was intended to shock audiences. Bizarre lighting, jarring music, blatantly sexual questions asked of the audience while their reactions were taped. Entirely disarming at first, these things became expected elements of future punk rock concerts.
He tickle me down to my toes. Oh, white light, I tell you now, goodness knows it's working. Oh, she surely do move speed. Watch that sweet freak, it's gonna go and make it every week. Oh, split a motor, everybody's gonna go kill a motor. It's guns, everybody get gonna make me run to it.
And yet another proto-punk band from the early 70s, the New York Dolls, were another New York band. Although their influence never went much beyond Manhattan at the time, today, fans look back and they appreciate how the Dolls helped pave the way for music. Their music was a blend of both the trends in boy-girl theme pop music and pessimistic social commentary. This is their song from '73 called Jet Boy. Blending glam and proto-punk, Jet Boy is about adolescent rebellion and sexual awakening. It's a song that pushes boundaries with its suggestive lyrics and energetic rock sound. Known for manic screaming, another trend that punk followed, they also got a lot of attention for the clothes they wore. The mildest way that you can describe it is androgynous. The band was managed by Malcolm McLaren, who, of course, managed the Sex Pistols. It was McLaren that pushed the Dolls even further to the fringes, like the concert that they performed with communist-themed clothes and props. The great rock and roll photographer Bob Gruen, famous for his photos of legends like John and Yoko, the Rolling Stones, Zeppelin, David Bowie, Tina Turner, Blondie, the Ramones, Patti Smith, the Sex Pistols, Kiss, and loads more, explained why the New York Dolls never became a bigger band. He said, if you wanted to work in the music business, you didn't go around admitting that you saw the New York Dolls. That was like admitting that you had friends who were homosexual. It was not popular in the mainstream. Judgmental, are we? Nothing quite like a New York Dolls show had ever been attempted before in rock. The band members broke new ground in sexual ambiguity. The guys wore dresses, high heels, fishnet stockings, ripped jeans, leather jackets, and outlandish makeup. They pushed boundaries and attracted attention with their visual presentation. But it wasn't just about fashion. They also carved out their own niche and stage presence, too. Their lead singer, David Johansen, frequently climbed up into the stage lights or threw himself into the crowd. The band had dance moves, dramatic gestures, and loads of audience interaction. Moving beyond simple entertainment, the Dolls' live shows challenged societal norms about masculinity, sexuality, and performance. They injected raw energy and theatricality into the rock and roll scene. In many ways, the New York Dolls gave birth to glam rock. Bowie was a regular at those early Dolls shows, in the city between 71 and 73, where he buried himself in their raw energy and theatricality. He called the Dolls one of the greatest rock and roll bands in the world, and said they were, quote, an inspiration. You can hear that influence in his music when you listen back to Ziggy Stardust or Aladdin Sane. Albums that coincided with the Dolls' peak. This was also the period when Bowie turned away from his early folk-inspired music towards a heavier sound, with Axeman Mick Ronson on lead, like on this song Suffragette City, from the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. In his Ziggy character, Bowie created a rock star from Mars, sent as a messianic messenger to Earth, who carried a message of hope and salvation to a dying planet. Unfortunately, this anti-hero took a tragic turn and succumbed to fame and self-destruction.
I wanted to write theatrical things, but actually, strangely enough, well, maybe it's not so strange when you look at it in context, but when I was around 17, 18, what I wanted to do more than anything else was write something for Broadway. I wanted to write a musical. I had no idea of how you did it or how musicals were constructed, but the idea of writing something that was rock-based for Broadway really intrigued me. I thought that would be a wonderful thing to do. And I saw myself as somebody who would kind of end up writing musicals in a way, probably rock musicals of some nature. But it never actually became that, so they were, in a way, they were, those ideas were kind of quashed a little bit when I realised what a huge ambitious thing that was to take on, you know, because you have to write dialogue and all that. And I really didn't know how to approach that. So I took a far simpler course and kind of abbreviated the idea of musical into just a concept piece for an album, and created the characters to go with the different albums. And in the process of doing that, I found that I was actually playing around with the music that I was writing more and more. So it really was, it was character driven that actually started to interfere with the music in a good way. And my interest eventually became just the music itself. So it's almost like I left a lot of the theatrical ambitions behind when I really got involved in the music itself.
I mean, Ziggy Stardust is a classic illustration. But so, how much of Davy Jones was it? Ziggy.
I like Sticky personally.
Sticky Stardust.
In fact, that was going to be my next project, is Sticky Stardust. I don't think there was very much at all. I mean, I honestly, I was trying to create an idea of how to expand rock and expand the horizons of it, and I took as the alien form for Ziggy, as he was supposed to be an alien of some kind. I based him very much on a Japanese concept. At that particular time in the early 70s, we knew so little about Japan, and Japan really hadn't exploited itself and brought its stuff over to the West, you know, so it still seemed like an alien society. But it was a human alien society, so you could make a human connection to Japan far more than you could say to Mars, which would be, you know, just beyond.
So how easy was it to leave the character behind? You killed him off so emphatically.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with it. I really didn't, because I really wanted to move on. In '73, we'd, you know, incredible. The whole thing lasted only for 18 months in all. I mean, it's just incredible. We did 1 year's worth of tours. We never even played Europe. We played England and the States. I should have killed my manager. We never played Europe, never played Australia. And it was over. It was just over. I decided, that's enough. I don't want to get, you know, imprisoned by all this. And because I really wanted to, towards the last 2 or 3 months of the whole Ziggy tour, I'd already kind of decided what I wanted to do and what I wanted to write. So for me, it was just absolutely necessary to move on.
And what was behind the androgynous images of the 70s?
It just seemed so perfect within the time that really represented what the 70s was all about. There was such a feeling coming out of the 50s and into the 60s, there was a real opening up of attitudes in the 60s. And then the 70s, everything became, it was the pluralistic 70s, you know. There were so many sides to a story in the 70s. Before, in the 50s, it was just black and white. It was one story, yes, and one story, no. But in the 70s, you could look at things in so many different ways. Nothing was right. The idea of absolutes, it was kind of starting to disappear. It wasn't a, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. And I just felt that it really summed up the whole of what the 70s were going to be about. It was a guess, and it was a good one.
Drawing from his New York Dolls experiences, Bowie injected Ziggy with the Dolls' androgyny. Ziggy's look challenged gender norms with makeup, flamboyant costumes, and ambiguous sexuality. Ziggy wore his hair in a dramatic bright red mullet with long flowing strands and spikes. To give Ziggy his otherworldly persona, Bowie applied heavy white foundation, bright eyeshadow, dramatic eyeliner, and painted lightning bolts down his cheeks. And an alien rocker is going to have clothes to die for, isn't he? So Ziggy's clothes were a kaleidoscope of color and extravagance. He wore bold jumpsuits, glittering bodysuits, dramatic capes, flamboyant jackets, just about everything from satin and velvet and studded with sequins and geometric patterns and futuristic designs. And Ziggy accessorized. Knee-high boots, platform shoes, mismatched socks. All of that added to his unique style.
Oh no, 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 you're a rock and roll suicide.
Ending the Ziggy story with a suicide, Bowie made it a commentary on rock and roll, alienation, fame, and the dangers of excess. Ziggy, the alien who fell to Earth, became a tragic anti-hero, who despite his flaws and eventual downfall, remained a sympathetic figure who struggled with identity and his own mortality. And because he did that, Ziggy ultimately stood for the rock stars themselves. So, all these bands that we've been talking about here paved the way for punk. And by 74 or 75, New York City's punk rock scene was on the rise. Bands like the Ramones, the Talking Heads, Blondie, and other groups that would become pillars in the scene all played regular sets in clubs around town. As these musicians and the lifestyle rose up, it shook the foundations of the music industry. Suddenly, bands like Yes and Pink Floyd, who had been at the top of the industry, were now, all of a sudden, yesterday's news. Punk also left an indelible mark on culture and society. The immediate impact was most of the adult world was in disgust. Parents were slack-jawed and gobsmacked. Yes, indeed, in a totally unexpected way, rock and roll was boomeranged right back to its primitive Stone Age days again. The longer-term impact, and we'll see this in later episodes, was that punk was like a forest fire. After it had burned everything in its path, a bunch of new bands and new forms sprang out of the forest clay. But like I said, more on that in future episodes.
Well, it's good to be back in England, and it's good to see all you again. Take it, dude.
You are, of course, listening to the Ramones, and this is their song, Blitzkrieg Bop. Hailing from Queens, New York, the Ramones were pioneers of punk. With this simple rallying cry, the Ramones ushered in their first album and subsequently revolutionized American rock and roll in the space of just 14 sharp tracks. For a growing crowd of disaffected teens, rock had turned into a musical desert, filled with dust, disco, and an occasional desert tortoise. And then suddenly it's, hey, ho, let's go. And the Ramones were on their way to becoming one of the most influential bands ever. Recorded on a shoestring, probably a Doc Martens, budget of just over $6,000. Is that punk rock or what? And released on April 23rd, 76, the Ramones packed 14 rockers into 2 sides of vinyl. Most of them under 2 minutes each. The longest tune, the psychological creep fest of I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement, clocks in at 2 minutes and 39 seconds. The shortest, Judy is a Punk, an ode to young offenders, blasts forth for a mere minute and 32 seconds. The self-explanatory, now I want to sniff some glue, all 1 minute and 35 seconds of it, is atypical in that it contains a rare guitar solo. This is ultra lean, no fat on the bone rock and roll. Here's the Ramones in an interview from The Tomorrow Show.
I'm talking to the Ramones right now. Joey, Johnny, Judy, and Marky, you have your people here with you.
You got the best fans in the world, you know?
Well, I guess so. They love you. And by the way, your names aren't really Ramon. You just didn't know.
Coincidence.
You never. It's a coincidence.
Yeah.
It just all happened.
When we met in the elevator, we all have the same last name.
You never give your real names, but you don't want your mothers to be subjected to that.
Disgrace. Right.
Yeah. How did you?
My mother just left the country, you know.
How did you get together with the guy?
We started like summer of 1974, and we grew up together, lived in the same block. We were friends. Something we always wanted to do.
It's a natural phenomenon.
Can you see?
Yes. Well, don't do it there.
Oh,
It's not the right spot, you know.
All right. And by the way, you know.
I was meaning to get a haircut.
You didn't have time.
No, it's too many things to do, you know.
You started back in the mid-'70s. I want to know...
I was going to type out a lyric sheet for you tonight.
I have it. We want the airways. This business is killing me. The Ku Klux Klan is stealing my baby away.
Yeah.
And teenage lobotomy. Yeah.
You got it all.
I got it. I got it. And you're doing really well with it. But you started punk, kind of.
Well,
we consider it a genuine rock and roll, you know, from the gut, you know.
rock and roll was meant for punks, and that's it started.
I guess Elvis Presley started
in the
rock and roll or
mid-50s.
something, you know?
Yeah, but punk is an answer to all the glitter and the stuff that costs a lot of money.
No, punk is just a rebellious rock for all kids, all of them.
Real rock and roll was punk.
Not a bunch of old men playing music for your mothers and fathers. That's what you have now, is what they call rock.
For instance?
Sticks.
Yeah, Sticks, Kansas, Foreigner, stuff like that. Your parents should listen to this.
Is it mellowing
My
out?
mother doesn't even listen to that.
Your mother's more hip than that?
Yeah.
It's just they just want to clean up music and just push mediocrity on the on the public.
So you're back to your tattered jeans and your sneakers and your leather jackets and nothing fancy and just
Well, we
do
just
it.
want to be real. We want to be ourselves and not put on a bunch of phony clothes.
Yeah, but wait a minute now. Is this real?
Yes.
Well, we wore what we always wore.
Yeah, no, but isn't this a uniform too? I mean, we all have
We
the
went
same jacket
over
on.
it. When we started the group, we were talking about what we were going to wear.
Uh-huh.
You know, when we started thinking about it, and we just decided to wear what we had.
This is what we were wearing before we were in the band.
We were thinking of getting dressed up and all that too, you know, and then we decided not to. Cause
All the big rock stars are wearing what we wear now, like Billy Joel, they're wearing their leather jackets and